Okay, so first of all, I want to remind everyone that I really encourage you to pick your topic. If you have anything you'd like to speak about, please feel free to share this with Janet or myself, and we're happy to explore any topic you may have in mind. In the meantime, I'll continue to come up with topics that I believe are relevant, especially to this pandemic. But I've heard from many people how frustrated they are. I mean, thank God, many also see, and these very people also see the blessings that there are in this quarantine life, so to speak. But obviously many of us, and it's natural to be frustrated and angry at the situation, especially that our future is unknown, especially that many have lost their jobs. Many find themselves in situations that they've never been in before, and they face hardships and obstacles day in and day out. And the natural first reaction is anger and frustration. So I want to explore that topic today and see what Judaism has to say about these emotions and how we can really transform anger, transform those emotions into positive traits. And I'll preface by saying that the reason for that, the reason we're exploring this and not just dismissing it is because Judaism does not view any trait as negative. As negative as they may sound, no trait, no character trait is negative. You know, Christianity has 7 cardinal sins. Judaism doesn't have 7 cardinal sins. No, it doesn't have sins that, you know, traits that are like envy or like gluttony or, you know, those cardinal sins. Those traits are not necessarily bad. It depends how you channel them. Same with anger and frustration. To be angry at the situation, to be frustrated, is completely normal, and that in and of itself is not negative. The question is what we do with this flare of emotion. How do we channel it? How do we make the best of it? That's the big question that Judaism asks. So let's dive right into this topic. And of course, if you have any questions during the class, feel free to unmute yourself and ask the question and then remute yourself. But this should be much more of a discussion than anything else. So really don't hesitate. Okay, let's begin. So regarding anger and frustration and this big topic that many of us are feeling these days, I want to go first and foremost to what Jewish law has to say about anger. And the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, which was authored some 100 years ago by a man named Shlomo Ganzfried, Rabbi Shlomo Ganzfried, says that anger, and I'm reading it from our shared screen, anger is also a very evil trait and it should be avoided at all costs. This is, of course, if we do not know how to channel it, which will be one of the themes that we'll be speaking about. You should train yourself not to become angry, even if you have a good reason to be angry. The question is, of course, how do you train yourself? What are the tools? And we'll go into different tools that we can implement into our daily lives so that we don't become angry in case we don't know how to channel those emotions into positivity. Now, there's a great letter I would encourage everyone to read. You can Google it. It's a beautiful letter, one of the most beautiful letters of Nachmanides. It was a letter that he wrote to his son. It's a guide for life, so to speak. And there he also speaks about this emotion of anger. And I'm reading again from the references here. Hear, my son, the instruction of your father, and do not forsake the teaching of your mother. Get into the habit of always speaking calmly to everyone. This will prevent you from anger, a serious character flaw which causes people to sin. Once you have distanced yourself from anger, the quality of humility will enter your heart. This radiant quality is the finest of all admirable traits. And then he quotes, following humility comes the fear of God. So you have the two extreme qualities. The most positive of all is humility. The most negative of all, according to Nachmanides in his letter to his son, is anger. And we have to train ourselves again to distance ourselves from this terrible quality. Now, why is it such a bad quality? The Talmud has a hint to that, and that is because it's a profound statement. That is because the Talmud compares a person who flies into a rage as a person who worships idols. Now, worshiping idols is one of the 10 commandments, is one of the big no-nos of Judaism. But someone who becomes angry, it's almost as if he's worshiping idol. Why? And the answer provided is very profound. It is because If we were to believe that what is happening to us right now, that is making us angry, came from God, then we wouldn't be angry. Then we would accept this as a test, or maybe even as a blessing that's disguised into a curse. We wouldn't be angry because we would know deeply and profoundly that this is heaven sent. But if we become angry, that means we're not accepting the yoke of God or the message that he's trying to send us through the obstacles that he's putting in our way. Just like an idol worshiper. What does an idol worshiper do? It doesn't accept God. He worships idols, therefore. Here, in a moment of anger, we're not accepting God and his messages. And therefore, this comparison between a worshiper of idols and someone who becomes angry. Again, to the point that Maimonides even says, deriving from this statement in the Talmud, the one who becomes angry is as though that person has worshipped idols, because he's not believing in God at that moment in which he's angry. So all these are warnings against anger. But I want to go into now the practical tools of what Judaism has to say, what Judaism offers for us to deal with anger, which is, again, a natural emotion to have during these frustrating days of quarantining ourselves, of uncertainty, of not knowing what our future looks like, and so on and so forth. So tool number one is a tool that beautifully described by the late Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Schneerson, in one of his letters, who, when he was writing back to someone who was obviously admitting that he has temper issues. And yeah, this is what Rabbi Schneerson writes back regarding what you wrote about the traits of anger and pride. As with anything else, the way to correct these is step by step. The first step is to wait. Don't express your anger or pride verbally. In this way, those emotions will not gain momentum, as can be seen in practice. So to give an analogy, anger is like fire. It's interesting because Kabbalah actually compares anger to fire. It compares sadness to dust. Every bad emotion or seemingly negative emotion is compared to another part of this world. But anger is like fire. If we attend to it, then it grows like fire, just like attending to fire. If we feed this fire, the flames will continue to expand. If we attend to our anger and we continue to dwell on it and ruminate, then it will only grow. And therefore, the first and foremost tool is to say to ourselves, fine, we feel anger right now. Let's pause. Let's wait. We'll get back to the subject that's making us angry in a few moments. But let's go down. Let's maybe think of something else. Let's engage in another activity. Let's go into our room and lock ourselves up and meditate. Let's do some yoga. Whatever it may take to calm ourselves down and to stay away from this fire. Then we can go back to the subject that made us angry in a more calculated way, and therefore in a more productive way. That's tool number one. By the way, it's true, I think, with any flare of emotion. Artists know this. People who write know this. But you know that sometimes you draw something, sometimes you paint something, sometimes you write something, and you say to yourself, gosh, I don't know if this is good or not. But I'm not in a position to judge my writing, to judge my painting, because I'm right now in this emotional state. So I'm going to put my letter away, put my painting away, and I'll come back to it in a few days. When you come back to it, you may see it very differently. And in a way, this is true for anger too. Something made me angry, I'll put it away, I'll get back to it. But not right now. I'm not emotionally equipped to deal with this situation. And that, I think, is probably the most brilliant of all tools, to just pause. I think, and I've said this before, I think that that's the part of the brilliance of Judaism, that whenever it comes to emotions, it has an exercise of waiting beforehand. I see it in my own children. So, we train them to say the blessing over the food, for example. What moves me most is not so much that they're saying the blessing itself and they're recognizing God, but by saying the blessing, they have to automatically pause for a few seconds while they're saying the blessing before eating, before jumping on the food like animals. So they say a blessing. This causes this wait. And then I think that they relate to the food differently. Unless it's chocolate chip ice cream and then the blessing doesn't help, nothing helps. But in most cases, it teaches them, it trains them again to wait. and to put their emotions aside so that they can relate to whatever they may be relating to in a more calculated and therefore more effective way. That's number one. And I think this is why the ethics of our fathers teaches who is strong, not someone who's, I don't know, who lifts weights every day and is in power of many people or over many people or whatever it is, but who is strong? He who subdues his evil inclination. As it is stated, who is slow to anger is better than a strong man, and who he masters his passions is better than one who conquers a city. I want to tell you the story of a little boy named Dwight. And this is not a made-up story. It's a very true story because Dwight eventually wrote this in his autobiography. A little boy named Dwight, who was the youngest of his brothers, and one day his brothers were allowed to leave and go out to some activity during a night, during the nighttime. And Dwight was told by his parents, sorry, you're too young, you're staying home. And Dwight was so upset that he just erupted in a rage. And he went outside, he started banging a tree that he had in his backyard to the point that his fist started to bleed very badly. When he came home, he was a little more calm. He had taken out all of his anger, and his mother calmly walked into his room and started to bandage his hands and quoted, they were a devout Catholic family, and she quoted exactly this verse from the book of Proverbs, from King Solomon, who is slow to anger is better than a strong man. He who masters his passions is better than one who conquers a city. She taught him this verse, the beauty of this verse, and she said, look, flying into a rage like this will never help you in life. You will be able to be as stronger than a strong man, and then one who conquers a city if you control your emotions and you don't do this again. This man was maybe an angry man, but he channeled his anger in the most productive of ways. He later on became the general, a big general in the US Army, Dwight Eisenhower, eventually became the president of the United States. And again, he writes this story in his book, in his autobiography, sharing that this was one of his the most important piece of advice he's ever received in life. Indeed, sometimes just conquering our emotions, putting them on hold, subduing that evil inclination that the Mishnah, that the ethics of our fathers speaks of, is what is most important. And then that trains us to deal with our emotions in a much more effective way. So if we're feeling anger and frustration during these very days, maybe let's try and focus on something else. Focus on an action, on a good deed you can do. Take your mind away from it. And then maybe in a few days, come back to the subject matter when you're more calculated and ready to address it. That's tool one. Tool two is a more of a spiritual tool. And that's the tool that shares with us that someone is watching. God is above us. And I'm going to quote the words of Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, the author of the Tanya, great Hasidic master of 300 years ago. He writes as follows: and behold, God himself stands over him, over every person, and the whole world is full only with his glory. And not only being omnipresent does he see everything, but moreover, he scrutinizes this person in particular and searches everyone's reins and heart, his innermost thoughts and emotions, to see if this person is serving God as is fitting. Therefore, and this is the punchline here, this person who meditates on this, that God is watching him and scrutinizing him at all times. Therefore, this person must serve in his presence with awe and fear. And let's skip the parenthesis. Like one who is standing before a king, one must meditate profoundly and at length on this concept, according to the capacity of apprehension of his brain and thought, and the time available to devote to this contemplation. That's another tool, to devote times during the day. I think that's the power of Jewish prayer. We pray 3 times a day, maybe because we have to meditate on this 3 times a day. Once in the morning before we begin the day, before the day gets to us, once in the middle of the day in the afternoon, in the heat of the day, and once in the evening before we go to sleep. Those are the 3 times we pray, because maybe those are the best times to meditate on this, to know that God is in charge, to know that although I may have my plan, God has his plan. And I might, as we've spoken about so many times, I have to be able to say to my plan sometimes, well, yes, I loved you. I wanted you to happen today, But unfortunately, these are things that are just going head to head with your plan, with this plan. I must therefore open myself up to God's plan. You know, there are many different stories about this, but I mentioned this during my Q&A last week. I've been thinking of him lately quite a bit, but there was an old man who came to our synagogue each and every week, each and every Shabbat. He was 100 years old, 101 years old, and he would come each and every Shabbat. Some of you may know him. He's Kenny Melech's father, Tzvi ben Moshe, as we would call him, alav shalom. And I remember him telling me the story, just a very beautiful story, about how he grew up in Białystok, Poland, and out of nowhere, the Russians stormed into their town and took as many Jews as they could and sent them off to Siberia just because they hated Jews. And when he landed in Siberia, in this cold, terrible place, he thought to himself, gosh, this is the worst thing that happened. And he had all sorts of complaints for God. And he said to himself, gosh, my plan was to go to school in Białystok, to graduate, to establish a family. And all of a sudden, my plan didn't go accordingly. In 1946, when the Russians finally opened up the gates of Siberia to these Jews so that they can go back to Poland, he realized that shortly after the Russians had stormed into Białystok to send them off to Siberia, the Nazis had come into that town. And if the Nazis, and the Nazis, when they came into that town, they of course took all the remaining Jews and sent them to the concentration camp and eventually to the gas chambers. And he said to himself, gosh, you see, I was complaining about the fact that my plan didn't go according to what I thought was best for me. But look, if I had not gone to Siberia, then I would have stayed in Białystok, and the Nazis would have gotten a hold of me, and they would have probably killed me. So in a way, it was the greatest blessing at that stage of my life to end up in Siberia and not to stay in Białystok. And sometimes indeed, we have our own plans, but we have to know that there is a God above us that has his plans too. He sees the big picture. He has the pilot view, so to speak, and he knows what's best for us. Yes, we might get angry and frustrated, but we also have to have that faith that he's designing things in a form and in a shape that's best for all of us. I would encourage everyone to Google a letter. I remember reading a few years ago a heart-wrenching letter by a woman who had a son who became a special needs child. She wasn't ready. He had Down syndrome. She wasn't ready at all for this surprise. And in her mind, of course, she had a healthy child in mind, and she wanted to do A, B, and C with this healthy child. Now that she was given this child of special needs, all of her plans changed. And she called this letter, Welcome to Holland. And in the letter, if I remember correctly, she writes about how she had planned to go to Italy. And she had studied about Italy. And she had gone over every map possible of Italy. And she had already decided which attractions to go to. And the plane finally took off. And all of a sudden, the plane lands, and the pilot says, Welcome to Holland. But in her mind, she wanted to go to Italy. Why Holland? And at that moment, she was obviously very frustrated. But then she said, well, I guess I don't have any say on my destiny. Welcome to Holland. I better learn the maps of Holland. I better learn what the attractions are in Holland. And she started to adjust to the fact that now she was in Holland and there's no going to Italy. But she also discovered that Holland is a beautiful country, and Holland has things that even Italy doesn't have. And slowly but surely, by adjusting her consciousness, by having that great shift from welcome to Italy to welcome to Holland, she was able to embrace her child fully and unreservedly and recognize that he had blessings that no other child has in the world. Sometimes that's what God expects us to do. We have our plan and we become frustrated and angry when those plans don't carry themselves out. But we also have to know that God is the pilot, and sometimes he wants to take us to Holland instead of to Italy. And we have to have full faith that Holland is the place really for us, that Holland has blessings that we couldn't even fathom with our own plan. That's number two. And again, feel free, ladies, gentlemen here to ask any questions you may have as we go through these tools. All right, so then tool 3, thinking ahead. That's yet a different tool on how to deal with anger and frustration. So again, from the words of Rabbi Schneerson, what does it mean to think ahead? So we have to think about the consequences of our anger. And he puts it this way: if you hurt someone's feelings, even out of anger, right? You were angry and you sent a text that you shouldn't have sent, or you spoke to someone in a negative fashion, that to your own children, to your own spouse, to your loved ones, in a way that you shouldn't have. So what will happen? Think, calculate, play chess in your mind. Then you must apologize in person and ask for complete forgiveness. It is by nature difficult for a person to apologize. Nevertheless, you should overcome that difficulty and do it. In that way, every time you're about to get angry, you will remember that afterwards you will have to brace yourself and ask for forgiveness. That itself will help you weaken your tendency towards anger. So if you start to imagine to yourself, 1 second, I'm getting angry, I'm doing all sorts of stupid things, and I'm going to have to apologize for these stupid things. So maybe I shouldn't do them. Let me put myself in my future. And that in of itself will discourage me from acting the way I'm acting right now. And it's true not just towards harm versus others, but towards harm that our anger in general can cause our surroundings, but also ourselves. Let's play chess. Now, it's not always possible because in a flare of emotion, our minds almost don't exist. That's the problem. But if you're able to maintain some type of thought, of mindfulness during that flare, then think about the future. Think about the consequences of your actions. I often say to bar and bat mitzvah boys that there are 3 stages of growth in Judaism. And when they become bar or bat mitzvah, they are entering that 3rd stage. The first one is being a baby. The second one is being a child. And the third one is being an adult, what bar and bat mitzvahs become. You know, there's no teenager stage in Judaism. There's no word for teenager in Judaism. We don't believe in that stage because you're an adult as soon as you turn bar or bat mitzvah. To the point that if they could, they would vote at the age of bar or bat mitzvah. They would get the driver's license at the age of bar or bat mitzvah. We consider them an adult for everything. But these 3 stages, I think, are best defined in the following ways. The difference between being a baby, a child, and an adult is that a baby has no control of his actions, nor of the consequences of his actions. You can put a baby on your lap, and all of a sudden the baby will slap you, but he's not aware of that action and of the consequences, obviously. A child is aware of his actions. If he slaps you, he knows he slapped you, but maybe he's not aware and can't really calculate the consequences of his actions. An adult, what is an adult according to Judaism? Someone who's aware of his actions and he's supposed to be aware of the consequences of his actions. That's why they say that in English, the word for responsibility is a combination of response, ability. You're able to respond. You're able to respond based on this calculation of consequences. You know, there's a different definition in the Talmud about a wise person. What is a wise person? Ezu chacham haro'eh et hanolad, one who is able to see the future. Think of the future. Think of the future that you yourself are creating through these very moments. If you're going to be angry, you're going to have a very different and maybe destructive future. If you can calm yourself and calculate your words and not speak so swiftly and not react so rapidly, maybe your future will look differently. And based on that sight of the future, you'll be able to control yourself. That's tool number 3. Again, any comments, disagreements, questions, I welcome all of them. So feel free to unmute yourself and ask anything you may have or say anything you may have on your minds. Even if they're out of anger, you're allowed to be angry at an anger class, so it's okay. All right, tool number 4 is letting go. Yes, something made me angry, and this is, I think, also a very difficult tool to exercise at that moment. But something made me angry. It could be an argument that I just had with a friend. It could be news that I received that I didn't expect. Now, I could blame everyone and their sister. But sometimes the best tool is to say, you know what, something happened. It's part of the past. You know, it's interesting, but the word for past in Hebrew is avar, which really means it passed. P-A-S-S-E-D. It passed. We passed it already. We moved on. That's the word for past in Hebrew. Whatever happened, happened. It's not a part of my present anymore. If it is a part of my present, then it's my past shackling me. It's not allowing me to live the present. It's the past. You know, we say in Hebrew, each and every morning during the morning prayer, it's the blessing before the Shema. We say that God renews our days every single day, or even at every moment of our day. Every moment is a new moment. Right now, this moment is a new moment. It's a moment that will never come again. Will very quickly go into the past. So if I cannot live the moment right now, then I'll miss it. And that will be the greatest travesty to living life. If we constantly live in our past, then we can never appreciate the blessings of the present. And this is why, you know, we just read this past Shabbat in the portion of Kedoshim, Leviticus 19:17 and 19:18. The Torah warns us very strongly about revenge and bearing a grudge and hatred in our heart. I'm going to read the verses. Do not seek revenge or bear a grudge against anyone among your people, but love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. Again, seeking revenge or bearing a grudge. If you bear a grudge, then you're transgressing a commandment in the Torah. And again, do not hate your brother in your heart. Now, what's wrong about hating your brother in your heart? It's in your heart. You're not exercising this anger or this hatred in any shape or form. It's only in your heart. No one knows about it. He can't feel it. No one can feel it. What's wrong? But what's wrong, the Torah is recognizing, is that it's eating you up. It's as toxic as could be. Why? Because it's not allowing you to live the present. It's completely imprisoning you into the past. And that's why any type of grudges, of negative feelings in the heart should be completely eradicated. And that's what they say, you know, the Hasidic saying as a beautiful, when we spoke about the 3 stages of growth, but here it speaks about the difference between children and adults. There's 2 stages of growth. And it says as follows. It's a great saying. What is the difference between children and adults? Children don't harbor grudges. They may declare with all sincerity, I hate you. And yet they quickly become your best friend once again, just a few moments later. An adult, on the other hand, carries resentment sometimes for decades without forgetting and without forgiving. Why the difference? And this is sad but true, I believe. And if you disagree, please feel free to say so. Because children choose being happy over being right. Adults choose being right over being happy. We all have to make this choice in our lives. Do we want to be right, or do we wish to be happy? That's the big question of life. And sometimes, yes, we might be right, but being right is a choice that we're making over being happy, and it will turn us into miserable beings. Sometimes you just want to let go. You were right, fine, but it's an item of the past. Let go and just be happy with what you have now, at this very moment. You know, I remember, and also I think I've mentioned this, but I remember the day I lived there. I remember the day Nelson Mandela was freed from jail after 27 years of torture, being in isolation. We complain being in quarantine these days. But imagine Nelson Mandela was in quarantine for 27 years in an abandoned and terrible cell, Robben Island off the coast of Cape Town, in an island disconnected from society altogether, starved very often, and treated in the worst of conditions. When he came out on February 4th, 1990, I'll never forget that day, living in Johannesburg then, he came out, and one of the first statements he made, when I asked him, are you going to take your revenge? Are you angry at the people who imprisoned you? What do you have to say about these Afrikaners? And he said, no, resentment is like drinking poison and hoping that your enemy will die from it. Resentment, in other words, only hurts you. You think that by holding a grudge, oh, your enemy's going to get it. No. At the end of the day, resentment is like drinking poison. You are the one drinking it. and hoping that your enemy will die from it, but he's not. You are going to die from it. And it's true. It's so true. And Mandela, as we all know, continued on with tremendous courage, and for never, not even for one instance, did he turn back and say, you know what, yes, I'm angry at these people. They destroyed my past. The past was the past for him. So if a man like this can do that, then even more so can each and every one of us. That's tool 4. Tool, yes, Janet, please.
I mean, it makes sense, but it just doesn't feel the same way. I mean, how do you change the feeling?
Right, that's why I said it's a difficult tool. I mean, sometimes.
Right, I agree with you.
Sometimes I would say it's a 2-step tool. The first step would be putting it aside, not relating to it. And that's tool number 1, right? You know, someone got me really upset. Right now, I am not at that position where I can just forgive and forget. So let me just put it aside. I'm not going to think about this person. I'm not going to think about what happened. Let me live the moment. Then I'll get back to it and say, you know what? Yes, this was my past. Goodbye. I think I've shared with you the story, but maybe I have, maybe I haven't. But we quoted the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Schneerson, his uncle. And it's an agonizing story. It's a very hard one to swallow. But his uncle lived in Russia, and he made a fortune by owning a forest and then selling the wood in the winter to those who needed wood to warm their homes, for their fireplaces. One day a fire broke out and burnt down his entire forest. So he had lost his livelihood in just a few hours. So a delegation of his friends said, you know what, let's go and visit him, let's comfort him. And they came to his home, and they found him studying a page of the Talmud as if nothing had happened. So one of his friends said, you know what, I'm going to go to him and maybe break the news to him. Maybe he didn't really hear the news. Now, this person who volunteered to go was a person who knew tragedy, and therefore he volunteered to go. How did he know tragedy? He had a son who had died 10 years prior to that. So he said, I'm going to break the news to him. And he goes and he tells the uncle of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, he says, you know, maybe you didn't hear that your forest burnt down last night. And the uncle of the Lubavitcher Rebbe stops learning. He looks at him and he says, maybe you didn't hear that your son died. He said, what do you mean? That happened 10 years ago. I got over it. And the uncle of the Lubavitcher Rebbe responded, well, my forest burned down last night. I got over it. Why use the maximum time to get over something when you can use the minimum time? Now, it's a very harsh story, because I do believe you need some time to overcome and for therapy and for tragedies like this. I mean, I don't think you can ever get over it. But he was maybe superhuman, but he was certainly sharing with us a message that sometimes, you know, we linger, this past lingers and lingers and lingers. And we do use the maximum time to get over small things. So why use the maximum time when we can use the minimum time? Life is short. I remember living in Atlanta for 4 years, and here we don't have it in Arizona, but in Atlanta, I don't know, in San Diego, I know we have guests from San Diego and New York here on the line. I don't know if you have Caribou Coffee. You know the Caribou Coffee chain, like Starbucks? But the Caribou Coffee, their slogan was, life is short, stay awake for it. And I think it's still their slogan. But in a way, it's true in this regard. Life is short. Stay awake for it. Don't keep living in the past. Use the minimum time to get over things. Why use the maximum time and sleep over such blessings? Stay awake for it. So it's really hard. And I think maybe we need tool 1 first before we get to tool 4. But I certainly think it's doable. All right. Thank you, Janet. Any other comments? No? Okay. So moving on here to tool 5, the final tool. And that is, we alluded to this at the very beginning. And that is that God brings obstacles and challenges upon people not to break them. That's not the type of God we believe we have. We don't have a God that's angry at people all the time and wants to punish them. There's no word for punishment in Hebrew. We don't believe in punishment. The word for punishment in Hebrew really means consequence, doesn't mean punishment, because it's a consequence to our actions. It's not a punishment. We don't believe in an angry God. We do believe in a good God. We say this in our prayer all the time, that he's great and he's mighty and he's good. And Teva Tov Leitiv, we say that God does good. And we say Hodu Lashem Kitov, we thank God because he's good. So our God is good. And therefore, we also have to believe that the challenges that he brings upon us are for good reasons. He's not one to bring upon a person a challenge just to get on his nerves. No. Maybe to better him, to elevate him, to strengthen him, to fortify him. There's a good reason in every challenge. And tool number 5 speaks to this idea that we might be angry right now at the challenge, but we also have to dig into it, to find the blessing within it, to find the good that God had in store for us in it. And this is conveyed, I think, by the biblical story of Jacob, who's fighting all night long. Again, fighting, just imagine, many commentaries ask, who is he fighting? Some say he was fighting an angel. Some say he was fighting himself. He didn't know who he was. He needed to dig deep to find the blessing within his own existence. And then he overcomes this challenge and finds the greatest blessing in it. I want to read the story itself and the commentary here again. We are known as the people of Israel. Now, where does this come from? Where did the Jews acquire the name Israel? It was acquired in one of the most mysterious events in Genesis. And this is the biblical story. Jacob is returning to his homeland after being away for many years. Alone at night, remember the story? A mysterious stranger attacks him. They wrestle. The assailant expects Jacob to be an easy victim. When he cannot overpower Jacob, he strikes him on the hip, dislocating it. Despite the pain, Jacob keeps fighting. By the way, Jacob suffered from this his entire life. He was limping. Then the attacker grows desperate. Dawn is about to break, and he appeals to Jacob to release him. Jacob knows that this is no ordinary opponent, but rather a heavenly emissary. Again, I want to emphasize this sentence. Jacob knows that this is no ordinary opponent. Jacob knows that no challenge is ordinary. It's heavenly sent. So he appeals to the challenge and he says, I want to know your blessing. What's your blessing? I will not let you go until you bless me. That challenge, the stranger asks him, what is your name? Jacob, he answered. Then he says, well, this is my blessing. The blessing of this challenge is this. Your name shall no longer be Jacob, said the stranger, but Israel. For you have struggled with heavenly beings and humans and have prevailed. Now, the bottom line is this. Like Jacob, we too wrestle in the dark when evil threatens or tragedy strikes. And like Jacob, we can refuse to relent until we have turned suffering into a blessing. We can become angry and stay with that anger all the time. Or we can say, 1 second, yes, I'm angry, but there must be a blessing here. I might not be able to see it right now, but I'm going to just be just like Jacob and continue to persist and persist and persist until I hear the blessing shouting at me from this challenge. And that's really I once asked my rabbi, Rabbi Steinsaltz, Dean Steinsaltz, what are the most important organs in the human body? And he replied, the eyes. And he was referring to what Helen Keller famously said when she was once asked, I'm reading here the last 2 lines, how does it feel to not have any eyesight? She was blind, as we all know. And she's responded, it's a lot worse if you have eyesight, but you lack vision. So as long as I don't lose my vision, I'm okay. And in a way, that's the vision that's needed of us during moments of challenge. Yes, challenge sucks. It hurts. It aches in many, many different ways. But we are the children of Israel, the children of Jacob. If there is one people on earth that know the power of transforming challenge into blessing, it's us. And therefore, we cannot lose that vision, seeing the blessing even within the challenge. And hopefully following it then and carrying it with us in our names, like Jacob then from that point on carried his new name Israel, referring to that blessing that he had discovered, that blessing that truly elevated him for the rest of his life. I want to conclude just with a personal story just shared with me by a friend. But I have a dear friend who unfortunately lost his father to COVID-19 just a few weeks ago. And unfortunately, his father died alone in Paris, France. Why? Because obviously he couldn't travel. And not only that, but no one was allowed to visit him. And his father was buried alone. And he was devastated by this. And just the idea that he wasn't able to be with his father during his last moments, and during Shiva, to sit Shiva alone, to bury him like Jewish law demands, just haunted him. And then as he's sitting Shiva almost alone at home, I mean, people were zooming in, etc., he decides to dig into all of the treasures that he had kept over the years from his father. And he saw the most heart-wrenching letter from his father, and to him, that was the greatest comfort and the greatest blessing he found in all of this. And his father was writing to him a letter just before he joined the IDF. And he showed me this letter. And his father told him, look, I know you're joining the IDF all alone as a lone soldier, but I want you to know you're never alone. Wherever you go, I'm there with you. If something happens to you, I'm there. If you are killed, I'll be there with you too. So don't you worry. We're born together, and we'll always live together. And it was just gave me goosebumps, as it's giving me now, because it's that vision that's demanded of us. It's exactly this vision that Jacob had, that Helen Keller is speaking about, that Jews are supposed to have. We are the children of Israel, as we said. That yes, we might be overcome by challenges in which we feel that we are all alone, that our father died alone. But then there are signs that remind us that that's not that real vision. The real vision comes from that letter that reminded me I'm never alone. And no matter what, I can see my father with me. I can see me with him, like this friend of mine said, in spite of the harshest of challenges he had to face in life. That's the vision that we need, especially during these times. That's tool number 5, especially during times in which we are frustrated, to always focus on the blessing within the curse, the light within the darkness, the hope within the despair. And then no doubt, anger will quickly fade away and be replaced by great comfort and goodness. All right, friends,